Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Survivor Series 2015. So, I watched this pay-per-view on Sunday, and I was so furious that I knew there was no way I'd be able to deliver a comprehensible review without going into pure rant mode. That is why my written version of this review, which you can find on my website, came out a day later because I needed to cool down just a little bit, and even then, I believe I kind of failed. I started off strong, but when it came to my overview portion of the writing, I could not help but just completely lose myself and just go in pure rant mode. But now my rage has mostly passed, and I just feel kind of burned out, exhausted, depressed, and totally uninterested in the product. It's currently Tuesday, and I have not watched Monday Night Raw, and I really have no desire to. This pay-per-view sucked. It sucked hard. I would say that this has been the worst event, at least since I've gotten back into wrestling. So, of all the pay-per-views in 2015, including the Royal Rumble, this was the worst. Of all that I saw in 2014, it was also the worst. Although, to be fair, 2014 was actually a pretty good year in terms of pay-per-view quality, in my opinion. At least the first half was really good. This Oh god damn it. There's just so much I need to talk about, and I don't have a whole lot of time because I have that stupid 15-minute running time or time limit. And I have to keep myself contained, but everything this show could have done wrong, it did wrong. And yes, I will concede that on a technical level, most of the matches were fine. Some were even enjoyable. But as a whole, the pacing was so fucking tedious. It was just so slow that I started to drift off around the halfway point. Even SummerSlam of this year, which was 4 hours long, seemed to go down a lot more smoothly. And I didn't think that was an especially exciting pay-per-view either. And I will explain why over the course of these next few videos. But I was bored and I was annoyed. So let's begin with the Kickoff show. It was a Survivor Series elimination match. And by the way, point one against this pay-per-view, the Survivor Series elimination match, where the pay-per-view gets its namesake from, has lost all sense of importance just from this pay-per-view event. There are two, if you count the Kickoff match, and both of them just felt like filler. There was no build-up to either of these matches. There was no story or feud. It was just they threw a bunch of random superstars together, and, well, we had to throw in a few in there just so we can call this fucking Survivor Series. So they may as well just kill this concept altogether. Or at least do it more sporadically like King of the Ring, although granted, that's been ruined too. Because if the Survivor Series matches aren't going to be the focal point, then why do it? Jesus. Okay, so Stardust Dissension, Miz, and Bo Dallas take on Neville, Titus O'Neil, Dudley's, and Goldust. I will give this match credit for actually making Goldust's return feel kind of important. The commentators seemed surprised. They did not embarrass him like, the Usos were embarrassed in their return where they were taken out almost immediately. So they did that well. Unfortunately, this match was boring and long and boring and boring. Uh, all of the spots felt like you would have seen on a SmackDown episode. I thought the action was very phoned in, and perhaps most damningly, the villains were all presented as jokes. And when you really look at, the people involved here, the heroes at least have a certain amount of momentum behind them. The Dudleys were recently competing for the tag team championships. It wasn't too long ago that the primetime players held those belts, and Titus O'Neil, even when he loses, is presented as dominant. And Neville's had sort of a soft push upwards. But when you look at the villains, I mean, when the primary antagonist is Stardust, you're doing something wrong. And I have nothing against Stardust as a worker. I actually think he's fairly interesting, but he is a jobber. And when he was built up, it was just so he could job to Neville. The Ascension, when do they even win matches anymore? Same with, Bo Dallas occasionally scores a victory on Superstars and Main Event. Yay. But he shouldn't even be here. He's the most irrelevant person in this list. The Miz, I mean, it wasn't that long ago when he really did feel important, but for the most part, he just loses all of his matches since defeating Sandow, and he's usually squashed in the process, so immediately we know that the good guys are going to come out on top, and that kills the suspense. So why do we care? And it became even more apparent when, for the most part, the good guys crushed the villains. And so it wasn't a good match, and there was no reason for us to give a shit. But that is the kickoff match, and its only purpose is to entertain the audience attending and maybe get a few people to, purchase the network or the pay-per-view, if it entertains them. Although, granted, that should have, in a way, foreshadowed the hell that was to come. But the first official match on the card, the first two official matches on the card were the World Heavyweight Championship Tournament semifinals. What happened to Seth Rollins is unfortunate. And for all the shit I've given him in terms of how he's been booked, and I don't like how all of his promos seem to be the same things repeated over and over again. I do have a high amount of respect for Rollins as a performer. I think he's the best worker on the roster. And, for this to happen to anybody, whether it's the Great Khali, my least favorite wrestler ever, or whoever my favorite is at the time, I never wish injuries upon anyone. And so that sucked. And I can't fault WWE for stripping him of the belt, even though it makes no sense from a story perspective, considering what happened with Bryan, or that. Well, they stripped Bryan of the belt rather quickly too, but they let Brock Lesnar wait months before he defended. But Seth Rollins is probably going to be gone for at least 6 months, so I'm not going to hold that against the WWE for just doing that. Unfortunately, the tournament has been rather awkwardly booked. There's a lot of face versus face matches, a few heel versus heel matches, and it made it a little difficult to care at times. Some of the matches were really good, but some were really bad, and some of the booking decisions were just bizarre. Like, why would they put Roman Reigns against Cesaro? Because all that's going to do is make people turn on Roman Reigns. Shockingly, that actually isn't what happened, but it seemed like that was what was going to happen. Ryback lost to Kalisto, as if they're going to do any singles push with him. God, that is pretty much, I don't want to say buried Ryback, but definitely diminished his credibility. I'm going to come back to that later. But I actually will agree with the first official match on this card. Roman Reigns versus Alberto Del Rio is actually relatively compelling booking, and I thought it ended the right way. Alberto Del Rio is struggling with a really stupid gimmick that makes no sense to me. Zeb is kind of a prick, but at the same time saying things like hate doesn't belong in Mex America doesn't really sound that bad. And it's not very interesting. Alberto Del Rio is one of those guys who I feel like he should be compelling. He has everything required to be a superstar, but for whatever reason, he's just not connecting to me personally, and a lot of other people. Sheamus has a similar issue, and I can't really explain why. Roman Reigns, I don't feel like he's been on fire lately. I can't explain why either. I think it's because they keep trying to present him as an underdog, and he just doesn't really work in that capacity. But still, he's gotten a lot better. Roman Reigns won, and that was the right thing to do because Alberto Del Rio, he's just not ready at this time for a World Heavyweight Championship run. Roman Reigns, I actually kind of think could be. But furthermore, Roman Reigns actually scored a meaningful win since Alberto Del Rio, if anything, has been booked to be strong. And Del Rio didn't really lose a whole lot of credibility because, he lost to the guy who's about to become the World Heavyweight Champion. Ultimately, this would collapse on itself. But at this time, I was content. And the match was good. I thought it was overrated. The crowd started chanting, "This is awesome," and I didn't think it was. But I thought both of them utilized their very different styles well. Del Rio broke out his, arsenal of moves that usually are based around submission or softening up limbs for a submission. Roman Reigns got to show off his strength and looked strong. Both looked really good. The only reason I don't think it's great is there weren't enough memorable moments or spots. I'm not saying they had to take any major risks, but even now, I can only really recall anything because I'm looking at my notes. No part of this match stood out, even though it was still enjoyable. It was nicely paced. A good way to start off the show. The second match is, and I gotta hurry up because I'm reaching the 15-minute point, Ambrose versus Kevin Owens. And Ambrose won, and I disagreed with that because Ambrose loses too much. He loses so much that he just doesn't feel like he belongs in the World Heavyweight Championship scene right now. And I like the performer, but that's just how he's been booked. So him defeating Kevin Owens does definitely increase his value, but not as much as it hurts Kevin Owens. And that kind of hurts the main event because I feel like Roman Reigns has been booked to belong here. Ambrose just has never been presented as being Roman Reigns' equal, in terms of how often they win. Now you could argue that it's about the drama, but I'll get back to that later. The match, though, was exceptional. Very fast-paced, very hard-hitting. I felt like both men were really trying to destroy each other. It was rushed in some parts, but I was always invested, and I thought Ambrose played the underdog very well, and it's so intense that his unpredictable spots, that lariat he does, that's supposed to surprise his enemy, but at the same time, we all see it coming, so we wonder how they don't. It moved fast enough to where I actually bought into that, and they had great chemistry. Kevin Owens got to show off what he could do, Ambrose showed off what he could do, and it was just a really, really good match. So, where did shit start to go wrong?